Today we have the Blizzard's official patch notes being released, and with that came the official set of balance tuning planned for 10.2. Now, of course, there is still a slight chance that before the release of the patch we get some more balance tuning, and then we have the certainty that in the first couple of weeks of the release of the season, Blizzard will continue to buff and nerf and tune some of the specs. But for now, these are the changes we have available. So what we are doing is we are going to be giving a quick pass to each of the specs, whether or not they are improving or getting worse in the next season. This is also taking into account their current power. So you don't really need to see Guardian Druid getting massive buffs because Guardian Druid is already an S tier spec. On the other hand, you want to see Prot Warrior getting major buffs because they are quite weak, right? So we have different expectations for each of these specs. We want to see augmentation nerfed enough to not be oppressively S tier, and we also want to see marksmanship being a viable spec, for example. Those are the situations for many of the specs. So we are starting on a negative side because we have Frost Decay, who gets rejected for 10.2. Basically, no changes. The tier set itself is actually strong, especially after they made it work much better in single target, but overall not nearly enough, especially considering their current mediocre power and the fact that we also already have the results, preliminary results from the PTR not being very exciting, so Frost, it's a negative. For Unholy, we're gonna give them a small positive. Their damage profile is changing in 10.2, they have much smaller burst for much higher consistent AoE damage, which is going to help them, especially in Mythic Plus where they are dreadful at. And in the raid, they will be losing out some of their power, in particular their priority for example, Power Infusion or even Ebonmite. It might go down, given that they lack more burst now, but overall, it's a slight positive to the ones who were not very excited about being all about a major burst window. To the ones who did like that, it might actually be a small negative, this change in playstyle for Unholy. They are still, though, in a better position than Frost. We also have to put Blood on the negative side because it's not even here. Blood is not being changed whatsoever. They are receiving a decent tier set, not that great, and considering they were not on the run for being a meta spec in 10.2, overall it nets out to be a negative. You wanted to see more for Blood Decay in terms of changes. You don't want to see more for Demon Hunters in terms of changes. For both Vengeance and Havoc, they went through a full rework, and both of them are very powerful. Both of them are positive. Havoc in particular has been one of the strongest performer in the PTR in both Mythic Plus and the raid. Vengeance has been made much stronger across the board. The tier set of Vengeance is also quite strong and powerful in both tankiness and damage, in particular tankiness. They still have the tiny issue of AoE damage, but overall both Vengeance and Havoc get massive power-ups compared to their current version in 10.1.7 in this season 2. Not the same, talking about the power-ups, can be said for Balance Druid. Balance Druid is not really getting that much stronger. Even their tier set they are getting after getting nerfed a couple times is not that exceptional. The changes to their talents and to their base abilities is not that great. They were not in a very powerful position in this season in overall across the board, raid or Mythic Plus. Whether it was a long fight, a short fight with more movement, the results were middling. So it's an overall negative. If you were expecting anything better, anything shinier for Balance, it doesn't seem to be happening. We can be a bit more positive for Feral, because Feral, unlike Balance, has been performing quite well on the PTR. The changes are positive. The tier set in particular is actually very strong. It gives them a very good on-use burst cooldown. Also, their situation right now was in a much more depressing spot than Balance, so overall the changes to Feral are more positive. It's more optimistic for Feral, even though they will likely continue to be very scarcely played. Guardian Druid, our first spec of the Exodia comp of Mythic Plus, actually gets a negative, actually gets worse in 10.2. mainly thanks to this AoE cap on the rage region, which will severely hurt the power of their mega large pools inside of Incarnation. This will be very hurtful to Guardian. The tier set is decently strong, just about their current tier set, so overall it's a negative. It's not a major negative, a massive negative, but it's not really getting stronger in 10.2 as a spec. For Resto, we have a question mark rating, because they changed a few things in their toolkit. They lose a lot of power in their cooldown because Flourish has been gutted tremendously. They gain more consistent healing, but the question mark comes in the form of Grove Guardians. Some Druids won't enjoy having to give up 20 to 30% of their healing to just an NPC uncontrollable mob who is going to heal whoever he wants. So some Druids will like that, other Druids will not. That's why we are sort of in the middle in judging how Resto feels like for 10.2. Where we are definitely not in the middle though is for Augmentation. This doesn't matter. All of these nerfs just no. It doesn't do anything. Augmentation will remain an S tier spec in 10.2 in both the raid and Mythic Plus. Unfortunately, Blizzard has failed in balancing the spec to the point where it's even an option on whether or not to bring one or not. So, massive positive for Augmentation, who sneaks by the patch without being nerfed to the ground. Unfortunately, this actually will hurt both Devastation and Preservation, in particular in Mythic Plus. Because, of course, if you have an Augmentation in your group, it's much less likely that you want to bring a second Evoker. So that will be quite hurtful and a negative for both of the specs in Mythic Plus. In the raid, it's a slight still positive, the changes to Devastation and especially also the tier set to Devastation, and a bigger positive, a larger positive for Preservation. The changes are mostly irrelevant, that the real power will come from the tier set of Preservation in the raid. And Preservation is more likely to be brought as a healer than Devastation is as a DPS. So that's why overall Preservation gets a slightly bigger win than Devastation when it comes to the raid. They are still, though, both of them hurting in Mythic Plus because of the power of Augmentation Evoker. We have then the Tragedy of Hunter. The Tragedy of Hunter is that both Beast Mastery and Survival get very positive changes. Beast Mastery gets a very powerful tier set. Survival gets a very powerful tier set centered around Wildfire Bombs. Survival itself gets more buffs to Wildfire Bombs. Not the OP state of Season 3 of Shadowlands, but still a positive overall change. The talent changes as well to Beast Mastery have been very beneficial. Even the results of Beast Mastery on the PTR were quite promising, so both of these specs get the thumbs up. However, Marksmanship also exists. Marksmanship was the worst performing spec in Mythic Plus and the worst performing spec more or less in the raid for the entire season, and in this patch they get no changes and they get a tier set which is a borderline DPS loss. So Marksmanship is the worst spec going into 10.2. In terms of options, in terms of outlook, it's a depressing state for Marksmanship. It's not a depressing state for Mage, but it's a very surprising one, because Mage is the class that gets changed the least. Not just that, it receives 0 changes. These are only fixes. There are no talent, tuning, buffs, nerfs, or anything of the sort for all 3 Mage specs. So we can only rely on looking at the power of their tier sets as well as the performance they have gotten from the PTR results, their presence in Mythic Plus in the PTR, and how they have been doing there. Because tier set wise, all 3 are reasonably powerful, especially Arcane and Fire are quite strong. Frost is quite powerful in Mythic Plus, in AoE, when you can freeze targets, it's powerful as well. And then you can look at their current power, how they were doing this season, this patch. So in general, we can give a big positive to Fire, a positive to Arcane, and a slight negative to Frost, because Frost was already lagging behind the other 2 in this season, and now they will likely continue to, even from the results of the PTR. Frost was not very exceptional in any way in the raid, for example, so that is how it feels like right now for the situation when it comes to mages. There is more attention and more more positive vibes around Arcane and Fire, more so than Frost. Talking about positive vibes, for once we might not be debated and overload on Copium in the fact that Mistweaver will actually be good, for once. Mistweaver is, generally speaking, a meme spec most of the times at the bottom because nobody wants to play it, nobody really likes the way, for example, they completely lack any powerful cooldowns and a series of other problems which might be fixed in this patch. They have gotten much stronger by the tail end of this tier when it comes to pure HPS. The patch is just giving them more things, it's further buffing them, giving them a massively powerful tier set as well, so positive situation and good vibes for once for the state of Mistweaver going into the next patch. The same can be said for Brewmaster, even though it's quite weird because Brewmaster has received 0 changes. The only change going the way of Brewmaster is the power of their tier set, shorting the main weakness of Brewmaster, which is self-healing, being self-sufficient, doing it by yourself with healing or absorb shields. This is what the tier set gives you and makes Brewmaster have a much more positive outlook for 10.2. Same cannot be said for Windwalker. Don't get baited, these are all just pointless fixes, the only reasonable changes are these 3 and they are not enough. The tier set is this one and it is not enough. Even after being changed like 15 times, the state of Windwalker is still not strong enough. Even in Mythic Plus, where it's supposed to be their strong niche pick of doing AoE damage, they are still behind multiple other specs, and in their main weakness, which is single target damage, they have gotten better, but still nowhere near enough to be competitive and or to see the patch in a positive light for Windwalker. So it's an overall negative for Windwalker, the situation coming into 10.2. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin has been buffed in its 3, basically, single target healing abilities, even 4, and then the rest were a bunch of nerfs. All healing was nerfed, you had the Glimmer healing nerfed, you had your Aura Mastery with Devotion Aura being nerfed, your Mana Regen being nerfed in multiple ways, you had your Defensiveness and Tankiness being nerfed, and even your External being nerfed. Similar to Augmentation, the TLDR is that this is not enough to take you away from your S tier spot. You were an S tier spec in Mythic Plus and still one of the more played in the raid, and you will continue to do so. Yes, you might be challenged now. In Mythic Plus, for example, you might be challenged by Discipline, maybe even by Mistweaver, but you're still a very powerful spec. Even in the raid, despite the nerfs, you continue to be one of the better performers in the PTR, even after all of these nerfs. So TLDR is, despite the nerfs, we are still looking at the season very positively as a Holy Paladin. Now, perhaps not very positively, but it is still a positive situation for Prot and Ret. Prot is not getting any changes, Ret is not getting any changes, but the situation was not that bad. Ret is already doing okay in Mythic Plus and amongst the better performers when it comes to melee in the raid. Their current situation in the raid, for example, from the testing was on the positive side, on the upper side of results. The tier set of Ret was also very powerful. Even after the nerfs, it's still a very powerful tier set, so it's a positive situation for Ret. Still positive, perhaps not as much for Protection Paladin, which might still have some room as the amount of utility and cheese and help you can have in the raid, for example, and also in Mythic Plus, in particular if Holy Paladin ends up not being the main healer. If it's something like Discipline, for example, having a Paladin as tank will be much more viable. In either case, it's a positive situation for both of these specs as well. Same can be said for Discipline. Not much more needs to be said. They have gotten a mini rework. The mini rework is positive. The tier set they have received is positive as well. So TLDR, considering the sad state of things of Discipline for a long time and how they lived in the shadow of Holy Priest for a long time, it's a definite positive. The opposite is true for Holy Priest. Holy Priest got the Holy Paladin treatment. They have been buffed in their single target heals but nerfed everywhere else. And now they also have to compete with Discipline. Before, they had free room. They had free room to play because nobody was playing Discipline. Now it's not gonna be that anymore. Now they actually have to fight with discipline, and it's not looking too good for Holy right now. So positive situation for discipline, not nearly as positive for Holy. Same can be said for Shadow. Shadow has gotten their tier set nerfed about 15 times. They have gotten their smoothness of rotation nerfed as well, when the compensation buffs are not nearly enough to make up for the damage done. This means that Shadow Priest coming into 10.2 will be in roughly the same situation that they are now. However, many of the other specs are getting better. Many of the other specs are improving, so this is not a good thing for Shadow Priest. Also, quite a few of the things that kept them as an S tier spec in Mythic Plus, like for example Masty Spell or even Mind Soothe or even the Power of Power Infusion, are all getting nerfed. So overall, it's a negative situation for Shadow going into 10.2. Rogues, not much to say, because they have received many changes to the 3 specs because of the rework. The TLDR is that there is one spec which is happy about this, which is Outlaw. And then there are 2 specs which are not doing nearly as well, which is Assassination and Subtlety. These are more or less the results of these changes. All 3 specs, to be fair, were not having too good of a time in live. All 3 specs, whether it was Mythic Plus, Outlaw, Assassination, were doing terribly. Even in the raid, Assassination, Outlaw were not doing that well. Subtlety was the one better than them. With this rework, it's not too good of a situation for Assassination, it's a mediocre situation for Subtlety, and it's a very good situation for Outlaw. That's the state after this rework for the 3 specs. Sad situation for Elemental. Elemental started out really well, they got a really powerful tier set, and then Blizzard said the tier set is too strong, here is a couple of nerfs which will hurt you a lot, and let's also nerf the tier set while we are at it. This has changed drastically the outlook of Elemental for 10.2. Now the outlook is quite bleak, it's quite depressing. So not a good situation for Elemental after these very heavy nerfs they have received. Enhancement is looking fine and dandy. Enhancement was one of the better melee performers in Mythic Plus. It was one of the better performers overall as a raid damage dealer, and these changes are overall positive. Even the tier set, moving away from a cooldown basically into a constant stream of feral spirits to lower the cooldown of your primordial wave, it's still a good tier set. They are still performing as well. They're still performing very well in the PTR, so just continues to be in a positive situation for the next patch. Same treatment for Resto. Resto was, unlike Enhancement, doing much worse this season, not really used in the raid or in Mythic Plus. These changes are all positive. The tier set is not nearly as strong, but also thanks to the buffs given to Chain Heal and the buffs to their healing and a few other one of their healing abilities, now they are performing as a healer way better on average than they were before. So it is still a positive situation compared to the current state of things for Shaman in live. Then we have Warlock, which receives the big brunt of changes to demo. Some players might not like it, the change that Blizzard gave to demo, but overall the numbers are telling us that the results are good for demo. Also, Blizzard went back on some of the bad changes, massively nerfing your synergy around your demons, around your pets. Now you are still playing quite a bit more with your pets, but the damage profile has changed a lot. Similar to Unholy, now you do much lower burst damage for much higher consistent damage. Some Warlock players, some demo Warlock players might not enjoy this, but that's how things are in 10.2, and I still think overall it's a positive. Just by looking at their performance as well, they are looking good for 10.2. Who is not looking nearly as good are both Affliction and Destruction. I think Affliction, at the very least, has gotten a strong tier set in 10.2, and their situation was not nearly as bad as Destro. Destro has not received enough positive changes, and their tier set is not strong enough to give them any positive vibes for 10.2. On top of the fact that they have a spec in their own class, Demo, doing much better than them. So It's a negative overall for Destro and a slight positive for Affliction, but the winner of Warlock for 10.2 is definitely Demo. The last one in the list is Warrior. Prot Warrior is receiving no changes, so it's a loss because Prot Warrior was doing terribly. You were expecting some positive changes, and even though, yes, the tier set is strong, it's not enough. So it's a negative for Prot. I would give both Arms and Fury a positive, because the changes are overall all buffs, and the tier sets are both strong. Now, they were not very meta before. They were not the strongest in anything. They were not, very, very powerful, and they will not be in 10.2. They won't be meta, they won't be S tier in any capacity, but overall, both of the tier sets and the buffs they have been receiving overall to their abilities are positive, and they will be doing better than the previous season. So in general, it's a positive outlook in 10.2 to both of these specs. So this is what we have so far as a recap to all of these specs and their changes coming in 10.2. There are some positive things happening, some negative things happening, but of course we're still reserving some hopes of some future changes, perhaps in these next couple of weeks before the release of the patch, or right as the season begins, the first week or so, couple of weeks, maybe we will continue to see some more significant changes to a few of these specs. But for now, with the official announcement of the patch notes from Blizzard, this is what we have planned for the changes to the specs. So I'm going to leave you with this to the rest of your Friday. We're going to start the goodbyes by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these useless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, my nose has been itching like crazy for the past 5 minutes. What is this?